Hello and welcome. I'm Nancy Van Schooenderwoert, and this is our webinar, Agile Methods in Medical Companies. Myself and Brian Shoemaker are hosting this, and we really want to spotlight really interesting and progressive things that Agile companies are doing in the medical product space today. Next, what I'd like to do is just, well, before I go further, I just want to give myself and Brian a chance to say a little bit more about ourselves, and then we'll introduce our guest speakers today. Brian, why don't you start?
Yeah, I've been working in the space of medical device software for a good 16 years or so as an independent consultant. I come from the diagnostics industry where I initially was a chemist doing assay development, and then I did a fair amount of work with linking up computers and instruments. And it was sort of a a natural outgrowth of the kind of work that I had been doing. And especially when I met Nancy, who showed me the answer to a question that had been bugging me for the longest time. My bosses kept saying, that validation stuff, that's of no great value. That just comes at the end. I saw in the Agile approach, especially with things like test-driven development, a way that the quality and the testing can be built in as part of the process. And I thought, wow, the blinders came off at that point.
Okay, and I'll introduce myself. I'm Nancy Van Schooenderwoert. I started out as a electronics engineer plus programmer, sort of a double degree. And I worked in flight simulation for my initial job. I worked in other types of defense work and industrial automation work, including medical devices. And over the years, I worked for almost 20 years in safety critical products of various types. And the thing that really bothered me about how we worked is that on paper, we were very logical and systematic and everything was all neat and tidy. In reality, we were constantly scrambling around. We didn't really do the fabled unit testing that everybody talked about in the waterfall days. And it just, it never made sense to me that it seemed like we couldn't get our act together. Planning was always out of step with what the technical realities were of the job. And by middle 1990s, I was team lead, and I had been picking up some really excellent techniques that were more iterative. And these were around before Agile really got a name. Quite a few people were finding one another and developing these things. And so what happened is I started to combine these practices and teach them to my team that I was leading. And we made progress that really surprised ourselves. And at that time, the Agile community was just starting to get created. And we were well into a project where we were using what anybody would call today extreme programming. But that was when the first book started to come out. We were half a year into the project at that point. And then we started discovering that other people were on the same path. So a few years later, I just began to do this full time, coaching teams. And that's what it's been since. Brian and I have found lots of reasons to keep on teaming up together. And you'll see in this picture here, there's the book that we've just published a couple months ago. So we'll say some more about the book later in this presentation, but let's introduce our guest speakers next. Caitlin Gould. I'll just say a few words and then give Caitlin a chance to say something. She was business development director at Bluefruit Software when we interviewed her for one of the case studies in our book. She's currently a co-founder of Tech Girls. And Caitlin knows a lot about sales practices and, product development in that sense, talking with customers. I'll say a little bit more about the cases for both of our presenters in a few minutes, but the case studies, I mean. But let me give Caitlin a chance to say hello and introduce herself. Caitlin, you got
Hi there. Yeah, thank you for having me. Like Nancy said, I've got a lot of experience working on the sales and growth side of things, but also working really closely with development teams, trying to improve customer relations, building up long-term relationships with clients, and thinking about how to improve that kind of client and business relationship. And that's where a lot of the agile practices really came into play around communication. And I'm now working with startups at a couple of university programs and looking at similar lessons.
Thank you. And our other guest presenter today is Brittany Hunter. She's a managing partner at Atomic Object out in Michigan. And oh, by the way, I forgot to say, Caitlin is joining us from Cornwall in the UK. Yay. And Brittany's out in Michigan, Grand Rapids, I believe. And so Brittany, I'm just going to say we met Brittany in connection with some work Brian was doing for a client of his. They needed some audit work done, and we'll say some more about that later in the program, but that's how we got to know Brittany. So Brittany, would you like to say some more about your background, please?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me today. I work with Atomic Object. We're a growing Agile software company, about 80 people now, with plans to expand 3 offices. Background in Agile since day one, where we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. And so in the early days, it was Agile was also in its infancy, and so it was an experiment. And let's found a company based on these principles. My career at Atomic has spanned a variety of disciplines. I started as a user experience design back in 2011, which was a really fun era because we were trying to figure out how does user experience design fit into Agile software teams. Then I moved into product delivery and running the Scrum process, Agile, customer relationships, etc., and got to fit those pieces together before moving into my current role of leadership and sales and management.
Well, that's great. Thank you. So what I'm going to do now is I'd just like to give people a little idea of what the case studies were about, just a couple of them. Just a quick recap here. Yeah, there we go. Case study companies. In the book that we created, Brian and I, we have 7 case studies, and they come from 5 different companies. They really run the gamut. Lab automation systems, if you look over at the left of the screen there, clinical trial data management, very data heavy work in that area. Pharma, medical device groups, Sanofi, and over towards the right, we're going to focus on those today. The Blue Fruit is a software contract development company specializing in embedded systems. And we've got Atomic Object shown here with the image in the lower right. And they teamed up with Neurometrics, their client, to produce a product, I should say. And they also do contract development for companies. They do whole product work, not really just focusing on the software or software hardware. Blue Fruit focuses on embedded systems development work. So that's how the 2 companies are a little bit different. And let's see what I want to say next. I just want to give you a little thumbnail sketch of the case studies that Brittany and Caitlin each worked in. We're gonna have Brittany tell us some stories first. And before we get there, let me just give you a little thumbnail description of both. Caitlin, in her role at Blue Fruit, she worked, I'll just give you the bottom line results. She came there to help improve their sales process. And she, by the end of the, the case study, she had tripled the number of closes per year, closing business. They were writing fewer proposals per year, and they were using less lead developer time in creating each of those proposals. So that's a pretty substantial improvement. And when we come to that, she's going to give us some more of the internal story about how that came about. And for Brittany, Brittany's case study, she had Well, she was guiding this project that they were doing for Neurometrics. This resulted in a 7-year-long business partnership that's still ongoing today. They basically started their commercial releases only a year into development on this project. And if you've ever gone through all the documentation in a medical device project, you'll know that that's pretty substantial. Since 2014, Atomic Object has been the mobile app developer for this product. No major problems, no big setbacks, no miscommunications. And I think one of the big things they achieved is that they decoupled hardware development from software development, so that they had a lot of freedom to test both of those areas well. Next, let's see, Brian, I think we can stop the slide at this point.
This will not be a slide presentation. In fact, we want more discussion than slides as we go along through this, and we're going to stop from time to time to let people speak up and ask questions. And if it's a really lengthy topic, we may need to say, hey, let's defer that, but we can certainly put you in contact with the person that you want to ask the question from. And you also wanted to talk a little bit about why we wrote the book.
That's true. We wanted to say a few words before we get into the case studies about why we wrote the book, our motivation for it. And for me, let me put myself on spotlight so you can see me. Our concern was that there's an awful lot of things going on in the name of Agile that don't feel Agile to us. A lot of copying without really understanding the reasons. Copying other companies' methods without really being clear why you're doing that or why it should work for you, things of that nature. And so what we wanted to do is, first of all, what inspired us was that we knew about some really excellent work people were doing that is not very widely seen. Generally these things are only known in small conferences or just by the people involved directly in a project. So we knew of some of them, and I was saying to Brian, we ought to write these up in some kind of a form that would get a wider audience. I just think people get inspired by seeing great examples, but then there's a little danger that they might copy too closely. And so we added some commentary to help people see how the wider Agile principles are really at work in these case studies. Principles like cooperation, courage, trust, automation, which is an idea from the Lean community about automation with humans involved. Teamwork.
Self-organization.
Feedback.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Well, the self-organization being one of the really important principles.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the other things that really spurred us to choose these particular case studies was that we knew that these were situations where people had made a real change. They had done a serious job of implementing an Agile method and had made some definite progress. Nobody's perfect. And in fact, we still need to improve in this, that, or the other way from some of our of the people that we interviewed. But the efforts were sincere and had made some definite difference. So we decided we needed to tell these stories, especially since a couple of years ago, we had published a book that was the primer about the basic concepts. And being a QA guy myself, I always run into the, yeah, I hear you, but do people really do that? But do people actually use that? And I have to be able to say, hey, look, read this book. You'll see that people actually do that, and you'll see what results they got.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I think now it's time for us to let's move right on to the case studies. What do you think, Brian?
Sure.
Give me a chance to talk. So, Brittany, I know there are some experiences that we've spoken about inside of your case study, and we'd love to have our audience just hear directly from you in your words how it went. Okay, I'm going to put you on spotlight, and what we're going to do is let Brittany have the floor for a little while, and when she's ready to take some questions, she'll let us know. Okay, so a few minutes. Go ahead, Brittany.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share about this. And as I go along, if there are questions or things you'd like me to dig into more, please feel free to pop them in the chat window. Otherwise, at the end, we can also have some more time for free flowing discussion. But it was really fun to talk to Brian and Nancy about this particular project for our customer, Neurometrics. This relationship, we are a software product development company, so customers will come to us with a product or idea that they have in mind, something that they need help bringing to reality. We staff software development teams, so we can bring the software development expertise, and then our client brings the idea, the concept, the product, and we work together to bring it to fruition. So in 2014, we were approached by Neurometrics to work together on their Quell wearable pain relief device. This device was not terribly new technology. They already had that technology in the market, but they wanted to move more to a direct-to-consumer approach versus a clinical prescription style or approach, or somebody gets this from their doctor. Now, as a result of our efforts together, it's available off the shelves in places like CVS and Target and Costco. The wearable pain relief device is worn on the calf. It stimulates nerves there, which send essentially pain blocking signals to the brain. There's a lot more science behind it than that, but that's it in a nutshell. And it helps people with various conditions, fibromyalgia, diabetic neuropathy, and other medical challenges. So in 2014, we began working together. Neurometrics had done some work previously with IDEO to refine the industrial design of the device to make it more appealing to consumers. And then IDEO suggested, well, Bluetooth and Bluetooth controlled devices are a thing that are becoming more and more prevalent nowadays. Really, to make this a consumer-friendly thing, you should consider having an app to go with it. And so that's how that concept was born. And in the early days, the application really did not control the device at all. It just reported status of the device. Is it on? Is it off? How have you, like usage times and things like that. And then over the course of the product's development and its life cycle with new versions of the product being released, we were able to work together to add more and more functions to the device and to the application. Things like being able to control stop-start, intensity, and then Neurometrics also began adding other sensors like accelerometers that can detect people's movements, which is useful for sleep tracking and movement tracking, which is very important things for people who deal with chronic pain. And the app can help them learn about their habits, learn about their patterns, and detect improvements in those patterns based on their pain status and usage of the device. So along the way, as the app grew in functionality from something very simple to something more complex and full featured, there were a number of Agile aspects that really enabled that process. And Brian, I know you have a couple of slides, so if you want to share them, feel free to pop them up on the screen. If not, don't worry about it. But I won't call for them directly. But one of the things that we went through as part of this process is, at a certain point, Neurometrics needed to do an audit based on the IEC 62304 software lifestyle standard. And that's where Brian came in and where we were able to work together. He worked with Neurometrics to walk through the standard and identify things that we were doing together already as part of our process, and also things that we needed to add to the process, and work to really clearly delineate what is the responsibility of Neurometrics as the product's developer, manufacturer, and what really makes sense for Atomic Object to take responsibility for or provide to Neurometrics as part of the as the software experts in the mobile application. So that was a really interesting process because in the very early days of our relationship working together, this product, Neurometrics is a very established company, but the product, I would say, was operating in more of a lean, agile, or what I might describe as a startup-y mode. So a lot of the documentation was a lot faster and looser. A lot of the product specs were developed via conversation, lots of phone calls, some back and forth via communication tools like Basecamp or Pivotal Tracker, backlog management tools, things like that. But it was not it was a process that placed a premium on getting it done quickly and moving fast versus sorry, my cat, versus rigorous documentation. And as the product matured, it was time to move that slider from the fast and loose end of the spectrum, you know, trying things out and seeing what gets product market fit, more towards the end of the spectrum of, okay, we need to more rigorously document what we're doing and why and where the instructions came from and how it's part of the product overall. And so working with Brian and Neurometrics through that auditing process, we were able to take and mature some of those habits, move that slider from the agile move fast end of the spectrum to the mature product end of the spectrum. And I think that's a really cool part of working with a company like Atomic, because our process, we try and be very process and tool agnostic. We start with you know, an agile process, this Scrum-based process as a template or a starting point, and then tailor the individual aspects and habits of the process to the product and to the maturity of the product. So as the relationship continued with Atomic and Neurometrics, we really had to, along the way, take some steps back throughout that relationship and say, okay, where are we and what needs to change in our working habits and how we interact with one another based on what your goals, Neurometrics' goals are at this point in the software and product life cycle. And that's it's not a terribly difficult thing to do, but it does require some discipline, and it requires clients too who are available and willing to have those conversations. You know, bringing Brian in as part of that process was great, with his third-party expertise and ability to kind of look at things from a bird's eye view and figure out, okay, between all of the different parties involved in this development process, what makes sense here. Brian, before I move on, is there anything else you'd like to add on that topic?
Well, I think one of the big benefits was the kind of education that I had gotten from Nancy, because coming in to look at the process, I could look at IC 62304, I could look at what Neurometrics needed to do, and I could see the thoroughness with which Atomic did their work and say, hey, you know, let's, from an appreciation, both as being a QA guy and being an understanding what the Agile approach was all about, that was what really helped this division of labor take place. And had a lot of very good cooperation with Brittany and with her colleague Jordan in the course of doing that, reviewing those processes.
Thanks, Brian. Before I keep rolling, are there any questions about what I've discussed so far?
You're welcome to put your questions in the chat if you prefer, or you can just unmute and speak. Anyone want to ask about the audit work?
Audits are so exciting. Everybody
Yeah,
loves them.
right.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Brittany, I suppose everybody's holding their breath to hear your next story.
Yeah, sure. I think another really cool part of this product and the software that we've built together is the testing infrastructure around it. So Atomic did not do the embedded firmware development that lives on the Quell device. Neurometrics has an entire internal software development team with the expertise in that space. And, I really should give them a ton of credit because they were excellent to collaborate with, when it came time to debugging things and figuring out like strange aspects of the Bluetooth protocol and figuring out why we were getting strange signals in some cases. We really love collaborating with that team. An important part when you are working with an integrated system like this, but especially with a piece of software, and when you are debugging, is having the ability to isolate where a problem might be happening. Is it happening in the firmware, in the device? Is it happening somewhere in after that in the communication, or in the way the phone application is hearing or reacting to different signals? Being able to isolate things really helps speed development and diagnose issues more quickly and with more reliability. So one thing that we did as part of this process was develop essentially a shim layer where we were able to write some code that behaved essentially like the pain relief device in the simulator signals that it was sending, so that we could test in various ways and in various cases how the mobile application would respond. So our developers could send a command over a socket to this Bluetooth signal simulator, which would send the simulated signal into the application and exercise a feature within the application. And through that, we had a number of benefits, being able to test different error states that might be hard to access or hard to put a physical hardware device into repeatedly. We could test that with over and over again with a high degree of reliability, and knowing that the correct or incorrect maybe signal is being sent, and see how the application responds. We were also able to simulate proposed behavior or pending behavior that maybe we didn't have on the device firmware yet, but we were able to then develop firmware and application software in parallel once we had agreed on generally how those protocols would function. And of course, once you do get the actual firmware in hand, it's important to test that too. But having a simulator, a robust simulator, allowed us to really experiment with some things, really continue developing the software in parallel with the hardware instead of waiting on the hardware to be finished and then developing the software. And it also really helped out with automated testing, which is another cornerstone of our process, and is incredibly important in these situations where you're developing a device and an application that needs a high degree of reliability. So we had a complete automated test suite for this application that would exercise the functions of the application end to end using this simulator. And it would run, multiple times a day or a development cycle. As we were continuing to create new features and change existing features, giving us and giving Neurometrics a high degree of confidence that the software would work. And so it really cut down on the amount of manual testing that had to be done, and provided developers and the client with a high degree of confidence. Another cool aspect of that automated test system was that it would take screenshots of every screen along the way, and it could take them at different phone sizes and resolutions. So for a phone application that was visually rich with a lot of custom user interface skinning, we were able to quickly QA that interface and make sure that everything was scaling properly and there were no text cutoffs or other collisions. Instead of having to go through and do that manually on a periodic basis, we could just look at the screenshots that were spit out from the automatic testing processes, and it was a very helpful tool for the UX design. It was a helpful tool for the client to be able to page through and look at all the screens. And it also assisted later on when we were doing a lot of documentation of the functionality and things like that for various certifications and process. So the investment in testing is not a small one, but it certainly pays off in terms of quality, in terms of being able to really go fast and really race to, for example, get additional features in before releasing to market or things like that, and be able to do it with a high degree of confidence that we haven't broken anything else in the process.
Can I jump in with a quick question, Brittany?
For sure, yeah.
So the point you're making is the simulation software imitating the Bluetooth signals. That was right on the mobile phone itself, right, as part of your software.
Yep, correct.
That's a pattern I've seen other teams do, including my own. You know what I mean? Because it was important to be able to thoroughly test our app, even for unusual conditions like low battery or things that would be hard to artificially make happen in a test scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an important tool, important issue as well. Years ago, when I was doing diagnostics work, the boss that I had at the time snorted every time we talked about, hey, we ought to set something up so we could do this automatically. And he'd say, yeah, they'll spend way too much time developing that and not enough time actually getting the product out. And he wouldn't recognize what the return would be on an investment like that. So actually the other comment is we have another case in the book where an automated test setup being able to emulate the actual hardware setup turned out to be extremely important. That's in the laboratory automation case story. Barb Haglund has put in a question here. How much did you find multiple Bluetooth signals interfering with each other?
That's a really interesting question, Barb, and I am not a technical person, so I am not a Bluetooth expert and I can't answer it. Sorry about that.
I can do a little bit on that because Neurometrics actually gave me a device to play with and to try out and to do a little bit of work with. I wasn't doing any of BJ, I'm sorry. To do a little bit of testing on it, to do some documentation with. And what I found was that I could pair with one system like the Neurometrics device. I could pair my mobile with that. I had my mobile paired with something else, but the Bluetooth low energy protocol is specific to talking with the particular device that you're paired with. So there's inherent in the Bluetooth protocol is the kind of working out of which device am I talking to. And Barnaby is saying, I like how the test automation led on to new emergent practices, like sharing screenshots with clients. That's a very good observation.
I have a quick question. You were talking about all these screenshots being produced automatically with the simulation tool. How were you able to use these screenshots in any sort of requirement or form like the SRS?
Yeah, actually, eventually, once we kind of turned up that dial on the rigorous requirements documentation, those screenshots would be brought back into the tool we were using to track. At that point, it was Jira, and then also some documentation in Microsoft Word. But we were, the test automation split out PNG files, and we were able to bring those in and use them at various places when we were submitting forms and creating other documentation to support the product.
Another question that has come up now is when we taking a look back at the auditing process, when you quote move the slider, as you put it, to gain more detailed information, more documentation to support the product, what did you end up losing? Was there some velocity lost by taking time to document more? Did anything else get lost?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It didn't necessarily change a lot in terms of how we worked together when we were say in the brainstorming phase or working out the details of specific functionality. So I don't know that it lost much. I don't think we had any measurable velocity loss. There was some potentially because we did need involvement from the developers on certain aspects of that documentation. But what it added was cost, because we had to have additional delivery time and project manager time on the Neurometrics side. So we had Atomic's delivery lead working with Neurometrics' product people to put together a lot more documentation and in essence piece together, create the paper trail for work that had been done to date, and then also ongoing as development continued. So it did increase the development cost, in that we essentially added a full-time employee to the team to do that work. Yeah.
Brittany, thank you so much for these stories. I think what we're going to need to do is move over to our next segment. But we also had a plan. We knew that people were going to have more questions or some in-depth questions that we wouldn't really be able to, squeeze into an hour. And so before we finish up our session today, we have a mechanism for people to follow up or to leave us some more questions either here in the chat or by connecting with us directly afterwards, and we will get them all answered. So I just want to assure everybody on the call that we've thought about that. Okay. And if I could move over, and let's all thank Brittany, virtual
Thank
clap.
you so much.
And I'm going to move over to Caitlin, and what we'd like to do now, Caitlin's whole situation really involves sales. This is a very big shift, right? So we're not even talking hardware and software so much anymore. And we're talking about moving to getting customers and how do you find them. And Caitlin has a story where she came into a situation where she saw quite a big disconnect. Shall I let you take it from there, Caitlin?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. As Nancy mentioned, I've got a background in kind of business growth, and I started with Bluefruit actually originally as a consultant, looking at how they might be able to grow their business. At the time, it just as a background on Bluefruit software. So as Nancy, I think, said earlier, Bluefruit software are an embedded software company based in the UK. So we're down in Cornwall. I'm American. You can probably tell by the accent, sorry. They've been going for over 21 years now. And we're really talented embedded engineers. We're doing everything in an agile way. They'd had training way before I got there from Nancy, actually, on how they could deliver embedded software in an agile way for their customers. And we're doing some impressive things, but their revenue and their client sizes and the project sizes really weren't reflecting the ability and the potential of the business. And so I sat down with Paul Massey, who's the founder, and looked at ways that we could try to grow. So first thing I did was a bit of an audit on the proposal process. And it was interesting to see the way that we sent out proposals as a embedded or as an agile company. The proposals were huge documents. They're about 20-page technical documents that detailed not only what the project could be, but tried to kind of teach what Agile was and introduce planning poker and everything in a proposal. And I started looking through this and how the process was for forming it. And it was essentially getting a brief from a client, development team, going away for 2 weeks, writing up a detailed proposal, and then just emailing it across. And I looked at that compared to a lot of the Agile principles around collaboration and communication and asking questions, and we were breaking all of the rules. So we went back and thought, okay, how can we build in Agile practices to how we work with our clients, not just how we deliver software? So one of the first things we did was introduce a quality control. Bluefruit prides itself on delivering high quality software, but we weren't getting quality software briefs. So I set up a quality matrix so that when proposals came in, we stopped wasting time on projects that either weren't the right fit for us in terms of their investment in quality software development, or potentially just weren't looking for the right project. And that immediately eliminated a huge amount of waste that we were seeing in the sales process. And then the next bit was changing how we interacted with our clients. So again, that collaboration theme and how important kind of fostering collaboration and building feedback loops in. So instead of going away and taking a basic brief or request for proposal and going away and writing it up, started introducing a lot more in-person collaboration and conversations. So we'd start by making sure that they knew we worked in a lean agile way and that they were happy to work that way. Some businesses found that it might be a disconnect with their culture. So we'd spend some time trying to figure out if we could make that fit, because there was no point in taking it further if we weren't going to be able to work together. And then wouldn't be able to understand our brief or our quote and our estimate, because we were estimating in points. So we spent some time doing that. We also worked with them to really dig into what the project was, asking a lot more questions. So getting an idea of the whole requirements, getting an idea of all of the different stakeholders. So making sure that we understood, just like on a development project where you need to understand all the different users, we needed to understand all the different people that would be stakeholders in the proposal process. And that was great because that oftentimes flagged up new teams that we didn't realize might be reviewing the proposal. So especially when we got into the medical sector, we started spending a lot more time a lot earlier on talking to quality teams, meeting with product teams as well. So it wasn't just the development team we were working with. We were making sure that we understood the business's quality requirements right from the start so that we could make sure to build that in to the proposal. We also started to try to get a better understanding of ownership. really early on. So who was going to own the different levels of quality, which is really important for that relationship. And I think having a lot of those conversations with clients, especially clients in the medical space, built a lot of trust. They could see that we were taking this seriously, that we knew what we were doing, but also that we would be involving their teams and we would be working collaboratively together. And I think setting that out at the beginning helped them to see that this is the way that we like to work. So as a result, we spent a little bit more time up front. We spent a lot more time talking to the client, but we spent a lot less time writing proposals. Something else we started to do was to, instead of writing these huge written proposals, we started presenting how we thought the project might look in person when we could, and if we couldn't, either because of location or COVID, we would have sessions where we'd go through the planned approach with the client. We'd explain to them why we were giving a certain amount of points for different areas. And that was really helpful too, because it meant that we could kind of do a check and that feedback that we'd properly understood the requirements. So for example, oftentimes when you're estimating, if you have a misalignment between what the project team thinks it's going to take versus how long the development team says it's going to take, it's worth digging into that. And just like, with planning poker, where you sit in and when you've got a big discrepancy between points, it was important to sit down and understand if we were really over or underestimating elements of the project. And that came in a lot, especially when we were working with legacy code. It's usually, we might have a discrepancy on how ready an existing product that needed new features was actually ready to have those come in. And that's, it's stuff that would have happened eventually anyways, but by having those conversations earlier on and building trust with clients earlier on, it meant that we were oftentimes entering into the engagements with a lot more transparency. If there was issues that we knew were really big unknowns, we would flag that and we'd say, we have a confidence rating on this estimate of 2 stars because there's so much unknown. And that would let the teams that we were working with know that, this is an area that budget might grow on. And there might be problems, but everybody's on the same page right at the beginning. And so we were avoiding that kind of classic problem of quoting one thing and then 3 weeks later discovering it's 5 times bigger than we thought it was and clients getting upset. So that was a lot of kind of what we started doing. I think the in-person stuff as well. So it went from, again, kind of formal proposals to more collaborations. Got a lot of buy-in from clients that way. So at this point, yeah, thank you. There's a slide. I think, yeah, it's another really good point. Thanks for putting that graphic up. We also realized that we were letting clients brief us in a waterfall way, but we wanted to respond with an agile project, and that was kind of confusing. So we worked with them a lot to understand too that they couldn't have a fixed scope, fixed time, and fixed price. So that was usually the starting point of the introduction to how we would run our agile projects. And it was great. I mean, the clients that we got were excited to work with us and were looking forward to working with us in that way. And the clients that didn't get it probably wouldn't have worked out for our development teams anyways. So it meant that the projects we got, the development teams enjoyed more. We were able to deliver them more efficiently and everybody was happier. So yeah, that's just this slide deck. That's kind of an example of how it used to look. And I think if you've got the next one, yeah, this shows all the additional steps and kind of feedback loops we started to add into it. So at any point during this process, if stuff wasn't right, we'd kind of kick it out in a positive way for both sides. So again, we'd stop wasting time. I think the other thing that's worth pointing out, as Nancy said earlier, in terms of our growth and the success of this, because we were getting projects that was a better match to our culture and a better match to how we were doing things in an agile way, it meant that we got clients that stayed. So we weren't just doing one project, we were doing 4 or 5 projects for a client. And we were building real relationships, not just a sales relationship. So we'll take some questions.
That's a great story, Caitlin. Thanks. Yeah, would anybody, you can drop a question into the chat, or you can just unmute and say it if you're willing.
Yeah, so Brittany's dropped one in terms of the client qualification check. There is a matrix of that in the case study in the book, but what we'd be doing was kind of have a matrix against the client itself, their willingness to work with us, their culture, their team structure, their understanding of everything from Agile, but also especially medical quality. So understanding how ready they were. Did they know what 6304 was? And on the other side, it was the project itself. So was it interesting? What was the size of it? What was the budget? What was the experience of the client? And credit risk analysis, those types of things. So we would then combine the two together and say, okay, this is an A1 client. The importance of that too is it let our team know how much effort, energy, and time to put into proposals for those projects. So if it was a C3, which is the lowest on both sides, we just kick it out. And if it was a B2, we'd have those conversations about how much effort and time we wanted to put into winning it. And A1s, we might do, spend months winning that project if we thought it could be really, really good for the business.
Yeah, so Caitlin's referring to a little grid that they used for qualification of clients. That's shown in the book. We don't have a slide for that. I just wanted to mention briefly, Bluefruit has created a free guide to helping people comply with IEC 62304. I put that in the chat window, but you can go to their website and get that.
One of the things that, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, the other thing with all of that, we not only collaborated with our clients better, but we also introduced and improved collaboration between our teams internally. So Nancy mentioned that guide we wrote. We started getting our development teams to work with the content teams, and that meant that we were creating marketing content that was highly technical, that was overseen and helped being written by the technical team, so they bought into it. But we brought in writers to do the writing part because our devs didn't want to do that. And by having them collaborate together, it meant that we were creating this kind of content that brought the right kind of clients to us, and kind of improve that process. And we saw that across content, we saw it across events, blog posts, and our proposals.
Caitlin, I can't help but observe that your story really, really shows a skillful use of feedback combined with collaboration, with everybody involved. And those are the kinds of things we were trying to point out in our case studies, where the deeper Agile values are really at work and how people pick them up and use them skillfully in ways that really fit their context.
And what also impressed me about the story, both in Caitlin's case and in Paul Massey's case, because we've got a case story from each of them, is that Bluefruit initially did not have and had not been seeking any certifications per se. They didn't have an ISO 13485 certificate, but their clients could see their dedication to high quality in their process and said, that's what we want. We can work out the regulatory details, but we want this quality dedication for the kind of product that we need them to develop.
Yeah, that was an interesting fact where the culture of quality started to attract medical device work, even though they weren't a certificate holder. Often the client companies are. I just want to see if there's any further questions or comments from our attendees on Caitlin's thing. If not, we could move to a couple of final announcements we want to make. Any other questions, comments people want to bring out? We wanted to have it be conversational. I don't hear. You're welcome to just unmute yourself if you want to speak, or drop something into chat. And Let's see. Nope, I don't see any. Okay. Shall I just move along, Brian, to our next
Well, we're pretty
steps
close to
here?
time here, so we ought to find a way to bring
Could
this
you
all
put
together.
up the last slide then?
All right.
I mean, the next one about our, we want to give people a chance to, if you think about this a little bit, maybe some questions will come to you that you want to go into deeper. We do have some resources that we've put together a while back based on conferences and whatnot. We received lots of questions from people and we wrote a 3-page paper responding. These are sort of combination questions about Agile coaching questions and also some wrapped up with regulatory issues. So that's one type of resource we could send to you. Questions from today, if you want to drop some things into the chat window, feel free to do that. We'll keep that open for a little while after we stop recording. We will save those and we will respond to those. We'll write up answers and you can come retrieve that. Just go to the link here and let us know. We do have a newsletter that does not come out on a regular basis. Personally, I think that's a relief. I don't like getting daily emails from, newsletters. So there's no spam and not too many. You're welcome to sign up for the newsletter. If you have an issue or a coaching problem or a regulatory question, and if you would like to meet with us and talk it over and, maybe get some help from us, we're open to that as well, of course. So anyway, you can check box any one of these things if you go to this link. Anything else, Brian, to say about this?
I'd be happy to send out this note about these the things that you can follow up with as a follow-up email as well. There is a fill-in form that just a real quick check off the appropriate boxes that's a step that's on my website. So one way or another.
All right, then next slide. We'll just wrap up. There we go. So here's some contact information. I've dropped this into the chat along the way, so you also have it electronically. Someone said, is this ending? I am so bummed. I thought it began at 11. I'm sorry. Yes, we are wrapping up, but we will put the video up someplace where it's available to you, and we will let all the attendees know. So you can contact us. Our contact information is on this final slide here, and we've dropped it into the chat window. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for attending. It's been great having you. I'm going to let's see, I guess I'll go back to gallery view and I'll just sign off and say goodbye. Brian, any last words you want to say?
Thanks to everyone for taking part. I'm glad we were able to get this group together. I show we have 18 people. We had a few more than that total, but it's good to have this kind of conversation. I think we ought to do this a little more often. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to sign off now and very much appreciate you joining us. I will stop the recording. Thank you.